Okay, hello and good evening to an extraordinary ELE evening. Extraordinary in many, many ways. Firstly, of course, getting here, which was quite a struggle for me, walking along snowbound Moscow pavements, actually remarkably clean, but nevertheless took me longer than I thought to get here. Remarkable because we have an amazing, amazing lecture tonight by somebody who you probably know quite well, somebody who's very hopeful, very efficient, and helps to organise these lectures week after week after week. How many of you knew that Dr. Oksana Danchevskaya is Associate Professor of Moscow State Pedagogical University, where she specializes in American Indian studies, cultural studies, and cross-cultural communication. She's the author of several books, including American Indians in the US Socio-Cultural Policies in the late 20th to early 21st centuries, Native American Mythology in Modern American Literature, and many other books, which I won't list here, too many of them. So, we're very fortunate to have this lecture tonight, which is called American Indians After Columbus. Okay, so I welcome tonight Dr. Oksana Danchevskaya, lecturer, American Indians After Columbus. Thank you.
Good evening, thank you for coming, and I hope that tonight you will probably learn something new about American Indians, and I hope that this information will be useful because we all have heard about American Indians, of course, but we don't know so much, well, at least the majority of people don't know so much about their life before and especially now. So today we're going to speak about several different topics, and as I plan to speak mostly about American Indians after Columbus. I will concentrate on some modern topics, but at the same time I need to mention something about the past as well, because this is really important. So, who are American Indians and where did they come from? One of the most supportive theories that the scholars have is they migrated across the Bering Land Bridge, and the dating can be different, but approximately 14,000 years ago. So this is the period when there was land bridge between Asia and North America, and they hunted animals and thus followed them and moved to North America. So as you can understand, it means that they are related genetically and in some other ways, culturally as well, to our peoples of the North, Siberia, and some other regions. Today, in North America, we have several cultural regions. When we speak about cultural regions, we mean Native American cultures. And just to explain from the very beginning, I'm going to speak about American Indians, Native Americans. These are synonyms, but of course, when they speak about themselves, they prefer to mention the tribe they belong to. American Indians, this is a simplified word, but this is quite common in the scientific world. And when we speak about cultural regions, it's not about one tribe, it's about a group of tribes, different ones living in that area. So we have 10 major different cultural regions in North America, some more in South one, in Mesoamerica, a separate region, the Caribbean also, but tonight we're speaking about North America. This is a map made by American Indians, and of course it doesn't represent all the tribes, it represents just the majority of them, but you can see how many of those tribes used to be and used to settle, at least on this map, the territory of the United States. And behind me you can see two more maps. I will explain a bit more about them later, and if you're interested you can come up after the talk and check some more information about on this one. The first one about the lands and the story of the land laws, And on this one, also about some of the great Native Americans. You see their pictures on top, including the ones of this century also. So let's have a look at the present situation about the population. We don't have the exact dates, and of course this is natural. There were no census, no polls at that time. How many people, how many native people lived in North America at the beginning of colonization? But scientists suggest that it was about 500 tribes, numbering to 5 million people. So this is an approximate estimate. Today, in the USA, we have 5.2 million people who ascribe themselves to American Indians. You have two different figures here. The first one, 5.2 million, and the second one is 2.9 million. The second one is American Indians, just full-blooded people. 5.2 are the people who have at least some amount of American Indian blood in themselves. In Canada, just to compare, this is 1.4 million people, and also around 60,000 Inuit. So this all makes a bit bigger number. And I also put some other countries just to compare to North America. So Mexico has the majority of them. This is 25.7 million. Then go Bolivia, Peru, and others. So in the United States, it's about 2% of the population, which is American Indian today. We still have tribes or nations, as they prefer to call themselves, or as they sometimes are called also peoples. This makes 567 federally recognized tribes. So what is federally recognized? These are the tribes which can get support from the American government. And this support means some bonuses on taxation, some money for social support, some development of the reservation, and so on and so on. But the problem is there are also about 250 non-federally recognized tribes. How could it happen? Well, this is some strange situation which happens in history, because as we're going to speak today also, you will see, during the treaty period, not with all the tribes, treaties were made. So if there is some document which states that this tribe has ever existed, so if this tribe is ever mentioned in any document, then this can be federally recognized. If there is no such a document, then of course we cannot speak about this tribe as it existed somewhere, so there is no proof. Thus, several of those tribes still suffer because they don't have any support from the government. So, there are 366 American Indian reservations, and on both maps you can see these are the areas in red, and it makes just a tiny percent of the lands they used to own, of course. The total area is about 227,000 square miles. But at the same time, despite having the reservations, the majority of American Indian population today lives in urban areas, in cities. And it also has some explanation, we will see when we speak about history. And only about 22% live on reservations. As you can see, the figures together don't make 100%. So the rest usually live on some other areas, like in the mountains, in the woods, and so on. So having separate houses, but neither on the reservation nor in the city. So let's have a look at a bit back. And as I said, I'm not going to speak much about the past, but I should at least mention the most important things. The first and maybe the major American Indian culture on the continent was Clovis. So these are the ancestors of the present-day Athabascans who live in Canada, on the territory of Canada. And this culture is prominent for their special arrowheads, They are even called Clovis arrowheads. They have a special form. You can see it in the picture. And also, this was the culture which, as most researchers believe, gave birth to all future American Indians. So it started in the north, then it distributed not evenly across the territory of North America. Then it divided into separate groups, and some groups continued their migration, some groups just settled in the places where they stopped, and then this formed different tribes. The next culture, which, yes, when we speak about North America, we cannot mention anything about civilization. For example, when we speak about South America, we can say the Maya civilization, the Inca civilization, the Aztec Empire. We did not have empires, we did not have civilizations, ancient civilizations, but the Mississippian culture is the closest which could be called, in a way, civilization. Because this was the first one where some state formation started. Again, this is not just about one or two tribes. This is about a whole cultural group which combined several different tribes. And this culture is famous, so what we have left of this culture, this is famous by Cahokia mounds. It's more than 100 mounds. These are big constructions of earth, and if you can see in one of the pictures, you can see the picture of a man which is really very tiny compared to the whole mound. So these are really big constructions, and scientists still don't really understand if they were only ritual or they had some other purpose. So there are different opinions about this, but this is not the question tonight. So Adena culture, a bit to the south of the United States, and this is also famous by their mounds. And the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio, which is depicted here, is really unique because this is, as some scientists claim, this is the only mound in the world which is built both according to the lunar calendar and to the solar one. Because usually most ancient constructions are built according to some of those calendars, but usually according to only one of them. So this one is aligned according to both of them, and you can also see perfectly well a serpent with the head, the tail. So this is not just beautiful, this is not just big, but it's also most likely, of course, ritual. Then we have the culture called Hopewell, which already when they existed, they were producing really interesting art objects. So you can see that these objects are very real-like, and they depict different animals, a lot of human palms, and different other figurines made of metal, made of stone, of very, very good and very high quality. Hohokam culture is especially famous for two major things. First of all, in this picture you can see a man standing like in a hole. So this is not a hole. This culture was in a desert area. So the biggest problem was, of course, about irrigation. They needed to grow some plants, but this sometimes was really difficult because there was not enough water and, of course, not enough rain. So people of this culture constructed a huge system of irrigation canals. Some of them we can still see today. And because of that, and thanks to that, they flourished for some period of time. Another interesting thing is those shells. So these are the engraved shells, and this technique that they started to use was not known to the Europeans until the 18th century. So I'm telling you all this, and I'm showing you all these pictures just to ruin some of the stereotypes that American Indians are primitive people. They are not. They are not for sure, and they knew science, not in our way as we see it, but for which worked for them. They also produced beautiful objects, they could build great constructions, so not primitive at all. One more culture, Magalyon. They have beautiful pottery. And mind you, on the American continent, there was no wheel. There was no, ceramic wheel, right?
Pottery wheel.
Yeah, pottery wheel. So they got it only much, much later when the Europeans arrived. But they still managed to produce really beautiful pottery. And this one here in those pictures is called Mimbras pottery, after the name of the place where it was found, black and white. And you can see also how finely it's made and those fine pictures which it has on it. And Anasazi culture, famous for their constructions, quite big ones. You can find them in Mesa Verde in Colorado and in Chaco Canyon in New Mexico. And first of all, you can see they are still preserved today. In Mesa Verde, these are cliff dwellings, so they are basically cut in a rock. And just have a look how nicely this is done. So there is a roof, natural one, which protects you from the rain. Then the back of the rock protects you from the wind and also from the enemies if they arrive. And you can perfectly well live in this like communal house. But still, the most important and the most famous communal house, if we can call it like this was Pueblo Bonita. It was built around 850, and it consisted of approximately 800 rooms as one construction. So this is one construction, 800 rooms for people living at that area. So let's look at the history. Everybody knows about Thanksgiving and about the first pilgrims, and this is the story which probably is the most known about American Indians worldwide. But sometimes this story is not told as it really happened. So, if you know it, let me just repeat it. If you don't, let me just tell it. When the first pilgrims arrived, they had some problems about food, and they were not so well adjusted to the new area, to the new climate, and they suffered a lot during their first winter. This was exactly American Indians who basically saved them, who helped them a lot. They brought food, they taught them how to grow some of the plants living there, how to cultivate them. They also showed them how to domesticate turkey. And that's why in this picture, in this romantic image, you can see American Indians and the newcomers, the pilgrims, living happily together, celebrating. So what happened next? Next, Americans survived, or they were not Americans yet, Europeans survived, and after some time they needed some more land, because they not only survived, but they also had more children, they also had more people, and they needed some more lands. Whose lands? Wampanoag's lands, of the tribe which saved them. So American Indians became an obstacle, and they were almost extinguished. That's why, by the way, when we celebrate Thanksgiving, American Indians have anti-Thanksgiving, and they also had some special events, special activities. We're not going to speak a lot about activism today, but this was very, very popular, especially starting from 1960s until the 70-something at the end of the previous century. And one of the things was dedicated to Thanksgiving, just to change the picture, because it was not to thank God. It was supposed to be to thank American Indians. Then there was a series of American Indian wars. American Indian wars are the conflicts bloody conflicts, serious conflicts between Indians and Americans. Of course, these conflicts were mostly because of the land. And one of the most famous, or infamous rather, was Wounded Knee Massacre, which happened on the 29th of December 1890, when American troops surrounded a camp of American Indians, and they asked them to give all the weapons. Americans were afraid that American Indians could probably start some riot or start fighting, so that's why they just wanted to collect the weapons. But there was one, according to the story as it says, there was one deaf American Indian who did not hear that, and he did not want to give his rifle because he had paid for that. So accidentally, as it says, this rifle shot, and this was the signal for American troops to start shooting as well, to start shooting back. So from 150 to around 300 American Indians were killed, including women, including children, elderly people, and the ones who were unarmed. So that's why this is called massacre. There were also other conflicts, and those American Indian wars lasted for, as you could see, a period of time, and this was on the territory of all North America. With some tribes this was several different wars, with some tribes this was just once. Well, some luckily escaped this fortune. So Pueblo Revolt is another interesting story. It happened in the southwest on the territory of the present Pueblo Indians in 1680. This is also called Popé Rebellion. Popé was the name of a Puebloan or an American Indian, so this is a monument to him and a picture of him. So in New Mexico, this was the Spanish rule. And of course, as you know, that all Americans, English, French, or Spanish, everybody wanted to assimilate Indians. So this was one of the policies. They also wanted to baptize them, because if they are Christians, they are more like us. This would be much more convenient to rule them. At the same time, American Indians have always been very traditional, and they like to practice their rituals, practice their religion. And this was not so encouraged by the dominant groups at that time. So some day there was a situation when Pueblans were celebrating, and some of them were caught. They were accused of shamanism. They were accused of being against the Christians, against Christianity, and so on. And some of them were hung, and some of them were lashed. Popé was among the ones who were lashed. And these are very proud people. So, of course, he wanted some revenge. And after some, but this was really dangerous to plan anything, because just imagine, Pueblos are just really small settlements scattered along a big territory. And of course, you cannot just make a rebellion out of a small settlement when there are so many Spanish around. So there was a very nice trick. You can see this string and some knots on it. So this was the way of communication. Every knot meant one day. So he sent those strings to all the settlements, all Puebloan settlements, and it meant that they planned this rebellion. And everybody knew, all American Indians knew when exactly they had to go up. And they did it simultaneously, and probably once in American Indian history they made this attempt was successful, and they managed to force away the Spanish who did not dare to return for 12 years. So this was a really big achievement. Well, after 12 years, they returned, of course, as you can understand. Also, everybody knows about the sad part of American Indian story, which is about epidemics and about their immune systems, which were not adjusted to the new kinds of diseases, the European diseases brought to the new continent. And this is just some of the mentions. There were really big epidemics of smallpox and measles in 1780s, 1800s, and just soon after that, smallpox, influenza, measles, cholera. Sometimes complete villages were dead. And of course, you can understand, medicine was not at a good level at that time, so there was no prevention, there was no isolation, so people caught it very quickly, and not having this immune system adjusted for that, they died in great numbers. And now we're coming more to what we have today, the reservation policy. So in fact, officially it started in 1830, but the ideas about that started much before. So in 1786, the first reservation of the Quinnipiac Indians was created. At the beginning of the 19th century, the idea already was forming in the mind of the American government that it was quite good to move American Indians to some special territory. Well, there are different reasons. First of all, you have more land. Second, also they are not so dangerous if they are isolated somehow. And in 1830, an Indian Removal Act was accepted. This was during Andrew Jackson, and the idea was to move American Indians west of the Mississippi River. Basically what happened. And you can also see that the majority of modern-day American Indian reservations are in the west, though we have them all around, but still the majority are there. Of course, some of the tribes were resettled. They had to move to some territories completely different from their traditional ones. And as traditional people, as any natives, they are very connected to the land. So land is not just the place where you can grow crops, but this is also the place which is part of your soul, which is kindred to you, which gives you strength, which gives you health, which is part of your culture, and which is sacred. So this is not just moving to a different place. This is much more than that. Some tribes didn't agree to move, obviously. One of them were the Cherokees, and they applied to the Supreme Court of the USA and said that according to the Constitution, we are a sovereign nation. So as a sovereign nation, you cannot tell us what we should do. Logical, but the Supreme Court didn't accept that excuse. Still, after some time, there was a very nice judge, Chief Justice John Marshall, who was very pro-Indian. And he made several decisions, which later helped American Indians, but unfortunately he was not very much listened to. So one of those decisions was, in this case, Cherokee Nation versus Georgia, which happened in 1831. And some of his decisions became the foundation of American Indian policy for later. So tribal sovereignty, he did agree that the tribes had sovereignty, and federal guardianship or paternalism. The policy of paternalism means that the federal government, the American government, treats American Indians like their children. So as they came to their territory, they now have to take care of American Indians. So, despite of all those decisions of the Supreme Court, the Cherokees were still moved, and it resulted in what is known as the Trail of Tears. The Trail of Tears because 1/4 of the whole tribe died during that period. So they moved to a different land, completely different from their native one, to Oklahoma. And as you can see in this picture, some sick people were left on the way, some old people, many people just did not survive. So this was a big tragedy. Then gold rush, of course, a very important period in American history. You can see a lot of it in those westerns, and usually this is romanticized, but as this picture shows, it's not so romantic as sometimes it's depicted. So gold rush was not for so long, but a lot of gold was found on American Indian lands, where they still lived at that time. And of course, American Indians were not happy about some people coming there and trying to do something on their territory. So this was one more reason to relocate them. Plus, the extermination of buffalo. Just look, 14 years only. And in 14 years, basically all buffalo were killed. They were not killed like American Indians used to do, just to get food. And for American Indians, this is this ecological approach, this sustainability approach, when you use everything from the animal that you kill. So you use the skull for ceremonial purposes, you use the skin for the clothes and for teepee construction, for houses construction of the housing. Then, of course, you use meat, you use the fat, you use everything. You use the other parts for as needles, you use some parts as threads. So Americans killed the buffalo, sometimes for fun, sometimes just for the ton. And as again you can see in this very famous picture, this is just one of the hills made of only of the skulls, not the whole skeletons. And compared to the size of man, you can imagine how many of them are in this particular picture. So this undermined the system, the whole system of survival of American Indians. Because for the Plains Indians, for example, this was one of the main source of food and other things. Then I should say a few words about the treaty period, the most probably important period from the political perspective in the history of American-Indian relations. This period lasted about 100 years in the USA, a bit less in Canada, and in Canada it started later. Treaties were made between some particular American Indian tribe and the American government. The idea of the treaty was, most of them were concerned the land, but there were also some about some other things like hunting, alcohol abuse, some other agreements. So this was basically about everything. And as I said before, the tribes who were mentioned in those treaties, they later became federally recognized tribes, as well as the ones who were mentioned in different chronicles describing American Indian wars and other events happening between Americans and Indians. So, 367 treaties in the USA were signed, and each one of them was broken. At the end of the 20th century, as I mentioned during this period of activism, political activism, one of the actions was the Trail of Broken Treaties, when American Indians marched to Washington and they asked, quite politely, they asked to review this situation and to still get back those treaty rights that they had according to the law. Some of them were heard, some of them are still being discussed, but of course a lot of apologies were made already in the 21st century or at the very end of the 20th century by the American government, by the Canadian government, but this cannot, unfortunately, repair a lot of damage done to American Indians. So, just getting back to the law, American Indians have they don't still have a single definition, so we don't still officially, legally, we don't know who is an American Indian, whom to consider an American Indian. There are about 33 different definitions given in different official documents, but it's not final. Still, the US Census Bureau decided to call an Indian anyone who wants to call himself so. If we look at the tribes themselves, usually today they have such a criteria whom to consider an Indian, whom to consider a member of their tribe, and the criteria is called blood quantum. So this is the amount of American Indian blood which you have in you. And as there have been so many mixed marriages, of course, we don't, maybe some, but still we don't almost have any full-blood American Indians today. So usually this criteria is something around 1/4 of blood should be from that tribe, and then you can be considered a member of the tribe. But it depends on the policy of each particular tribe. So only once in the United States Constitution, American Indians were mentioned. Though, again, they were the first ones to live there, but they were mentioned only once. And this was in the first article, Section 8, where it states that the US government has a relationship with American Indian tribes as government to government, which means that they are regarded as foreign nations. So, again, logically, we can draw from that American Indians do not depend on the American government, and they can have their own policy, they can behave as they want, which, of course, was not the fact. So those three things, government-to-government relations, tribal sovereignty, and the Marshall Doctrine, they all make the basis of American Indian policy. Then, speaking about education, a very important part about boarding schools. So the idea came first to make what was called day schools. They were made at the reservations, or on the territory of the reservations, and every American Indian child until 16 had to attend those schools. Just to learn, of course, English, the Bible, so two most basic things, and some other ones. The main idea, again, during all this period, the main idea was, first, if we look generally at the policy of Euro-Americans first and then Americans, the first idea was to exterminate Indians. It didn't work, they did not disappear completely. Then what can be done? They should be assimilated. So to assimilate them, this means to make them speak English, to make them behave like the whites, like American Indians, and also to teach them all American ways. So those day schools didn't work much because most of the time they were still living on the reservation among their relatives in their traditional families and speaking their languages, practicing their culture, and so on, so on, so on. Then the idea came about some kind of boarding schools which were 5 days a week. So they had to go to school on Monday, they came back on Friday, but still they spent the weekend there. And parents also visited them during those 5 days, and those schools were located just outside the reservation. Didn't work either. And then finally came the idea of boarding schools. The idea was from Richard Henry Pratt, who first created the first school for the Apache Indians, for prisoners, and 3 years before 1870. So he made this kind of experiment. He wanted to teach those Apache prisoners English and the Bible. Well, as it succeeded, he suggested to the government that why not try it with all American Indians. And the first school was Carlisle Indian School, opened in 1878. So, what happened? The main idea of Richard Pratt is known today as this flying phrase, his maybe most discriminating phrase, to kill the Indian and save the man. So these are his words. Save the man means if you kill the Indian part of the person, then what will be saved will be the true good American. Children were forcefully taken to those boarding schools. The boarding schools were quite far from the original reservation. They spent usually around what we call today a semester there and could visit back their parents, their relatives only during the holidays. The rules were very strict. They were not allowed to speak their native languages. They were not allowed to wear long hair, and for American Indians, as you probably know, even for men, hair is usually long, and this is part of their culture. So their hair was cut, their national costumes were taken away, they had to wear traditional American dress or suits. As you can see in the picture, they look all the same. And they also had to obey all the rules of life of Americans. One part of the education process in those schools was to spend several months in good, reliable American, good Christian American families. In fact, for many situations, it was just free labor force, like having slaves at home. They were not so much taught in those families. Most of the time, they were just used to do different errands. And it didn't last for so long, but it was heartbreaking for many people. A lot of people could not find themselves, could not find their way in life later, because they, on the one hand, they already lost, during such a long period of time, they lost some of their American Indian cultural identity, and they were not always completely accepted back by the tribe. But at the same time, they did not become complete Americans. So they fit neither here nor there. And it led to a lot of depressions and even suicides. Yes, I forgot to mention that some people, some children, were so much stressed that they got sick, they tried to run away. Some just died for psychological stress, some died for physical reasons. Then comes General Allotment Act, another idea what to do with American Indians. Well, if we cannot exterminate them, we cannot assimilate them just like as they are. We should do something to break their community. Because American Indians, again, like most traditional peoples, they are communal people. So they used to live together and they used to work together. According to this act, and the picture you see here, you can also see on this map here. This is what happened after the act. So the act is here, 1830. So this was just 20% of the territory. And this is 1900, basically similar to what we have today. So to each American Indian, an allotment of land was given. And those allotments were not always fertile. Those allotments sometimes were in very bad areas. And they were not all together, like, for example, one tribe, and then the land is divided between them. Some of those allotments were surrounded by the parcels of land of the white people. Some of them were also not suitable even for growing or cultivating anything. But it was not, and they were quite small, of course. But the most important problem was, for 25 years, each owner of this kind of allotment could not sell it. This was according to the agreement. They could only inherit this, and all American Indian families usually had a lot of children. So you can imagine from that small piece how much each future generation got. And it didn't really work. But this was a good idea to get a bit more of the territory, because this was already legal. Then in 1928, some positive, hopefully, change happened. This was the Merriam Report. The Merriam Report was requested by the American government, and the idea was to research how well does the policy work, working with American Indians. And it showed that it didn't work. So they were not assimilating, they were not becoming good Christian Americans, they were not really fit for the society as they were expected, and in fact it brought more trouble than some success. That's why this was the year when a lot of policies stopped, including boarding schools. So after that report, the policy started to change. Then in 1938, just after the Great Depression, and during Theodore Roosevelt's New Deal, there was also what is called Indian New Deal, so some set of laws which aimed to help American Indians. And there was one really important person, John Collier, who was responsible for American Indian affairs in the American government at that time, who initiated Indian Reorganization Act. So this was the first attempt to give tribes, already officially, legally, finally, some kind of limited but still self-government. And this was also a different act from the previous ones because this was signed only by the tribes who wanted to sign it. So this was not completely forced. It worked for some tribes. It didn't work well for so many others, but still, the ones who agreed, the ones who signed, had to create their own government and regulation policy and system according to the American one and according to the American Constitution, taking it as an example. Then, one really bad situation was in 1950s. This was termination and relocation. These are the policies coming closely together. Termination, to terminate Indian tribes. So again, if we terminate, so no man, no problem, right? If we terminate the tribes, no Indian problem anymore. And how to terminate them? By the policy of relocation. Relocation from the reservations, from the tribes to the cities. This would bring us just cheap working force. This would make those Indians who are so much attached to the land to be more civilized, and they would be able to also live in the cities. Some special agencies, American Indian agencies, were created in cities and helpful centers and so on. The problem is they did not know what to do there. They were not used to this kind of life. And this was completely new to them. Many wanted to return, but they were put back. And again, just a few years later, in 1959, this policy ended because it didn't bring any result. The only result was, can you imagine what kind of jobs those Indians got? Of course, they did not have any education for that. They did not have any special skills for that. So they got the lowest paid jobs, the most difficult ones. They got the apartments in the slums, in the worst areas of the cities. So of course, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, suicide rates, broken families, depression, and so on, so on, so on. Some of them, after this policy ended, returned back to their tribes. Some of them decided to stay in the cities. So this is also why we have now a lot of American Indians living in the cities. And maybe the last point I would like to make about American Indian policy is related to health service. So there is a service, there is a special organization which is called Indian Health Service. Well, it helps American Indians, but not always. In mid-1960s, there was an idea that there was a special conference held at the government, and they decided that we should start some fight on poverty. So how to do it? American Indians are usually among the poorest, the poorest layer of the population. So why? They started to analyze the reasons, and they just decided that the reason was that American Indian families traditionally have a lot of children. So to support every child, it needs more money, with new child more money. So if we reduce the number of children in those families, their income would raise and they would be more prosperous, so the problem would be solved. But of course, if you just ask them not to have so many children, this would not work. They decided to start this program of sterilizing American Indian women of childbearing age. During just 6 years, about half of American Indian women of that age were sterilized. But how was this done? They were asked to sign a special consent form, medical form. Some of them did not even understand what they were signing. Many did not even know English enough to read it. This was not really very well explained. And how was it discovered? Because very soon after that operation, many American Indian women came back to the doctors and said that they want children, but they are trying, that doesn't work. So they did not realize that this was just one way, this could not be turned. And this was, of course, a big stress to all American Indian society. Just a few words about stereotypes. You already heard a lot of it. And the two most famous ones. Where does it come from? When Europeans came to the American continent, there were usually two kinds of... Again, this is very, very roughly, of course, but you could divide the tribes which were more hostile and the ones which were more friendly. The ones more hostile brought the stereotype, a bloodthirsty warrior, especially when they took the scalps, which was not because they were so cruel, but because this was also part of the tradition. And when you kill an enemy, or you just defend an enemy, and you take his scalp, you also take his force and his energy with you. So you become yourself as a warrior, you become stronger. So this is explicable. But of course, you can see those pictures are taken from the movies, and Hollywood movies are a great source for stereotypes of all kinds and about American Indians as well. And another one is the noble savage. This is much older in the European conscience, much older, not on the American continent. This was still mentioned by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and this was mentioned about those people living somewhere in nature, being very harmonious, and basically understanding the language of the animals, living in sustainability, and all those beautiful things. Being in a good physical form, maybe being too naive, but at the same time not meaning any harm, maybe not being very educated, but at the same time being very kind, having those honesty, pride, and other positive things. Both stereotypes, even this one, which looks really good, also did harm, because they gave some wrong expectations. And about expectations, I would just give you just one example, which was in already 1869. So this was not the very beginning of colonization. So the Supreme Court of New Mexico reported Pueblo Indians, non-Indians. The reason for that was the fact that, and this is a quote, they looked and behaved like their more civilized neighbors, which is the white population. So they cannot be Indians, they behave too well. But very soon, the government just heard about different riots, about some fightings, about some games and traditional ceremonies on those territories, and they changed it. So they said, no, they are Indians. And one more fact also about stereotypes, and this one is usually not mentioned anywhere and it's not so popular. So, for example, in 1650s, the Dutch, after another massacre, brought 80 cut heads of American Indians and used them as balls to play football. And also, there were also different laws which allowed people hunting for American Indians, and each head had a price, scalp. So this was the period when the whites started to scalp Indians. And the scalp of the child had one price, of a woman had a different price. The most expensive was the scalp of a man, because it's a warrior, bigger threat to the whites. Then, in 1711, Virginia gave 20,000 pounds for killing all Indians, be it friends or enemies. And these are just few examples. You have a lot more. So then, again, I will just quickly show it, not describing a lot, because you can also see a lot of these kinds of beautiful samples on the internet. Many Native Americans have their local stores now and even online, but just some of the traditional arts and handicrafts. One of them is bone carving, and if it was the Inuit, they used walrus, but this was on mostly all the territory. And long ago, some scholars claim that even human bones were used, but I cannot confirm or deny it. Then turquoise inlay, really beautiful, really high quality, especially known among the Pueblo Indians, and they have beautiful jewelry techniques. They mostly use silver, and turquoise is the most famous, the most favorite gem, the most favorite mineral of American Indians. So this is used for different purposes, not only to make jewelry, but also to decorate different objects as well. By the way, let's get back for a second. These are the beads found in Pueblo Bonito, so centuries ago. Then wood carving, of course, the classical totem poles, in the northeastern region especially. These are the sculptures of Bill Reed, a very famous Canadian a sculptor of American Indian descent who died just not so long ago. Shells and shell work, of course, shells from the Atlantic and mostly from the Atlantic shore were used, but also they were traded as well among the tribes. Wampum belts, they are made from seashells and they are used for different purposes. First of all, this is what is called status object, a status object. So only the people who deserve them, the ones who are really respected, could have them. Later, they were mostly just decoration, but this was a very good present if you made a treaty, if you wanted to make peace treaty especially, a very good present to the chief of a different tribe. Also, this was not this example, but I hope you can imagine, depending on where the white ones were placed, this could also be used as a language. So this could give a message to a different tribe. And some of them were given even to some important white people as a sign of friendship, as a sign of making a peace treaty. Famous American Indian pipes, of course, and we have most of them we have in black or red. The black ones, modern black ones, are usually made by the Cherokees, but still the most popular, the most traditional are the red ones. And they are made from the stone called catlinite or pipestone, just exactly because it's used for only this purpose. There are only two places where you can get pipestone in North America, one in Canada, one in the United States, and only American Indians are allowed to take it, because this is for traditional purposes, for traditional crafts. Porcupine needle embroidery. Maybe it's hard to believe, but these are porcupine quills. So I guess it doesn't need any comment. Then basket making, especially the Pueblos were really good at it, and they, since the old times, they have been doing it. And these baskets, again, they could be made as a good present, as some serious ceremonial object, but they could be also used for storing. And some of those baskets made by already famous modern makers, basket makers. I heard some information about collectioners buying them for thousands and thousands of dollars, because this is really not just beautiful, but also a unique piece of art. Ceramics. All tribes had different colors, different designs, and some of the ceramics were in very unusual shapes. But of course, the most famous colors, as usual, everywhere: black, red, white. Then, jewelry, as I mentioned before. Beadwork. They did not have beads before, which is, biser, right? They did not have it before. The Europeans brought it, but they liked it so much that they decided to use it for their purpose. And from footwear to just clothes to different accessories to jewelry, everywhere. So beadwork is very much associated with American Indians. A special separate one about Navajos. They make Navajo blankets, which are also quite expensive on the market, and they can save you during cold nights in that desert area. But you can also use them for as a cover. You can use them to lie on them and so on, but with special Navajo designs. And this is how they are made traditionally. So, a few words about religion and mythology, which still is preserved today. And of course, this is totemism, the belief in some totem spirit, usually some animal, or it could be a fish, a bird, even an insect, which used to be the founder or the first person of either some family or a tribe. So there is a lot to say about totem poles. Again, there are special books on that. I'm not going to dwell a lot about this, but they are really beautiful. And you can see a lot of them in the northwest of North America, mostly in Canada. Animism, the belief that everything is animated. In other words, it has a soul. And from this belief goes the attitude of American Indians to every living object. And living, even a table is living, right? So not in our conscious, but if you treat everything as a living being, then you treat life and the world completely differently. Shamanism, still very popular, and just at the beginning of, in 2005, 2006, I was questioning a lot of American Indians about if they get ill, where would they go? To traditional, in our idea, to traditional medicine like shamanism. And for American Indians, the word is different. This is a medicine man. So the person who not only cures the body, but he can also cure the soul, and he can also, what we call, make magic. But not only that, many different responsibilities he has. And most of the Indians answered that they would prefer the white doctor only in case, for example, of a broken leg or some appendicitis which needs to be cut. But for the majority of cases, they would still prefer going to their medicine man because they trust them more still. A lot of taboos. Medicine men have maybe the biggest number of taboos for their life, what they cannot do, what they should not do. But even average Indians can have also different restrictions, sometimes imposed on them by themselves, sometimes by different situations. Cyclicity or cyclicality, this is part of all mythology, all religion of American Indians. So everything goes and develops as a cycle, not just the seasons, but also human life. And we are born, we live, we die. Then we have the same cycle in the underworld or after death, and then we get reborn, have the same cycle, and everything goes on as a cycle. Agricultural tribes use a lot of this cyclicality in their calendar, in their ceremonial calendar, all different rituals of revival, of harvest, and so on. Storytelling. American Indians are the masters of word, and the word is a sacred thing. They don't just, again, traditionally, I'm not saying about maybe some modern trends, but still, the word is still respected, and this is not used in vain. This is usually, they are famous for being quite short, but very precise, and they are very good orators because of storytelling. Because for centuries they did not have any written language and they had to remember everything. And storytellers were very much respected in the tribe just because they had so many stories and a lot of the history of the tribe, the mythology, the religion of the tribe, and at special moments, at special events, they taught the new generations. Myth and ritual are an essential part of American Indian life even today. I guess, again, this probably doesn't need much comment because a lot of books can be written about that. Too many comments, rather. So color and number symbolism, they still work. I had some particular research project exactly on color symbolism, and what I discovered was that American Indians mostly use basic colors. And these are, well, you can see most of them here. These are red, black, and white, the archetypal triad called by Turner, of the whole humanity. Then green, blue, often this is turquoise blue, in some other cases this is dark blue, and green, yes, sometimes, but mostly these ones. And number symbolism, again, just to mention, these are usually 3 for the upper world, our world, and the underworld, then which is the vertical idea of life, then 4, which is 4 directions, like as you can see here. Every direction also has a color, every direction has its sacred animal and other things associated with it. So the 4 direction symbolism is very strong. And then 7 as the combination of the vertical and the horizontal worlds, and also sometimes 9. Then we have a lot of parallel motifs in mythology in general in the world, but we also have a lot of parallels between our peoples of the north, of Siberia, of the Russian north, and American Indian people, and now you already know why. Navajo sand paintings, very beautiful things, and after the talk I encourage you to come up here, and thanks to Oksana we have a beautiful sample, and I also brought one more of modern sand painting, so you can have a look at them here. But these are the modern ones. The difference originally, traditionally, just like in this very picture, they were made just for once, to be used only once. They were made with colored sand, pollen, and they were used usually for healing ceremonies by the Navajo. They represented some pictures from mythology. Well, I say mythology, but of course for American Indians this is religion, right? So then after the ceremony or during the ceremony they were destroyed. So they were not to be seen by outsiders, they were not to be to last for a long time. But the present world makes us to make money and makes us produce something for the market, and these are the more modern ones. They are put on something which can be sold, which can last, usually some strong base, and using some clay, some glue, they can be presented like this. Even if you see sometimes something looking like a traditional sand painting, be sure either some element will be missing, you will not notice it, but they will know, or this will be changed a bit, because of course the traditional ones still are not to be told to anyone. And besides, American Indians are among maybe the most reserved, the most closed traditional peoples. It's not so easy for even researchers who have communicated with them for a long time to get a lot of sacred information from them. They don't like to share so much. This figure, Kokapele, very important for the Hopi mythology. He's responsible for fertility. He is responsible for also fertility in nature, other things. But he is always depicted as a humpbacked flute player. And sometimes I just remember a really funny situation when I saw this image in a Greek store, some jewelry, something like this. And just out of curiosity, wondering if they know what they're selling, I asked, who is that? And she said, this is some African with dreads playing some musical instrument. So if you see it again, I'm sure you will know that this is an American Indian figure, part of mythology. And by the way, Kokapele is one of the first figures in American Indian petroglyphs, which can be one of the oldest ones which was discovered. And of course, the dream catcher. So this is how it looks like. I think you probably know the story behind that. But even if you know, let me just quickly tell it because I really like it. It looks, I think, very beautiful, very romantic. And originally this was from the Ojibwe tribe, but then it became pan-Indian. Pan meaning like all Indian tribes, considering it part of their also tradition. So you put a dream catcher near your bed to get away of any bad dreams at night, and all the dreams will get to the spider web. So the bad ones will get stuck on the spider web, and that's why this usually has a small piece of stone, usually turquoise, but nowadays you can meet them in different other ways. So the spider will guard it, and he will take care of them to be the bad ones to stay on the web, to get stuck there. But there is a tiny, tiny hole here, which the good ones will find, and they will pass it, and they will go to your dream. And in the morning when the sun rises and the rays of the sun touch it, the bad ones will just dissolve. The good ones will stay with you. So I think it's really beautiful, and no matter even if it works or not, nice legend, right?
It works.
Yeah.
It's my home. It works.
Yes. Well, for me, it mostly works also. So again, there are about 20 or more types of dwellings, American Indian dwellings. Why I put it here? Because sometimes people mix. Well, this one you will hardly mix. The igloo, the Inuit igloo, really beautiful one, especially at night when the light, the fire burns in. But this image is very well recognized. And this is the teepee, which is very often mistakenly called a wigwam. This is not a wigwam. So the teepee is made of long poles, usually equal to some number divided into 4 or to 3, and buckskin around it, sometimes just plain, sometimes with some design. This is for warrior tribes. This was famous for the Great Plains, and you can see a lot of it in American movies, in Hollywood movies. This is really great because you can change the camp really quickly. You can very quickly remove it. You just take back the skin, like unzip it, roll it, put it on your back, and the poles you can find anywhere where trees grow. These were usually the women who had to carry all of this on their backs, because men had to carry nothing except the weapon, because who knows, maybe the enemy is hiding somewhere in the shrubs, and they should always be prepared to respond to the attack. And this is the wigwam. Absolutely not what is usually imagined about this. So this is made either of timber or usually bark, and it's used in eastern USA and Canada. And one word about the languages. So we had a lot of American Indian languages before, or by the beginning of colonization. This was, again, approximately, by the approximate estimates, around 500. Today, about 200 major languages 51 language family groups, and also some dialects. Half of them, or approximately half of them, are in California because there are a lot of smaller tribes, sometimes just one, several people, and maybe they don't even remember some of the language. Many languages were lost, of course, but nowadays many tribes do something to revive them. They write them down, they make some special programs, they teach in native languages inside the tribe, and so on. But more interesting fact for the world in general, then some languages, American Indian ones, were used for different purposes. For example, the Navajo language was, the grammar of the Navajo language was used for American Sign Language. Then a lot of the Apache, the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Comanche languages were used for creating different ciphers by the military. And the Navajo one is famous for their Navajo code talkers, the ones who use this special code. So this one was created during the period of World War II, and this was the only code that the Germans could not break, because this was quite complicated, and this was like a mixture of some ideas, the Navajo language, so mostly Navajos could use it really well. And that's why a lot of them worked during the Second World War. In fact, American Indians participated in all the wars the United States led. And among the first killed in Iraq were American Indians. So we have even a monument today to that Navajo code talker. You could see a very romantic picture about this in Talking with the Wind movie with Nick Cage. But this was kept secret until 1990s. And so just very few of them survived until that time, the veterans. But they could not even be given medals for their service because this was still kept secret. And only in 1990-something, the last ones who still survived got their medals. And just a few, because there are so many great Native Americans. The famous Hiawatha, sung by Henry Longfellow in The Song of Hiawatha. Really beautiful one. If you haven't read it, I really recommend you. If not for American Indians, then for the beauty of the language and the poetry. The story, how it was in real life, or at least as it says how it was in real life, because Hiawatha became a hero of also American Indian mythology, as well as a culture hero. And he really deserved that, because at that time there were a lot of intertribal wars and a lot of conflict between the tribes. So Hiawatha once, there was another one, the Ganawida. He was not mentioned here because Hiawatha is usually more popular, but they were together. So the Ganawida was something like a prophet. He had a vision that all the tribes had to unite, and then what is commonly used nowadays, and bury the tomahawk of war under the roots of a pine tree. So this was like the vision of peace and unification of all those tribes. The problem was the Ganawida was handicapped. He could not really move well. So he asked Hiawatha to take this message to all those tribes. What Hiawatha did, and first he managed to seduce 5 tribes to finally have peace between each other and to form the Iroquois Confederacy. And then one more, some time later, joined them, the Tuscarora tribe, and then it became a confederacy of 6 different tribes. Then Pocahontas, most people know her from the cartoon, but again, the story, of course, is not exactly as it was there. So she is very often called the vital link between the whites and the American Indians. When the colony in Jamestown was made, She also saved a lot of Americans, a lot of Europeans then, by bringing food to them, by asking her father, the chief of the tribe living nearby, not to fight them, not to kill them, and to support them. And there were many different stories connected with her, but at the end, she finally married John Rolfe, an American who lived in that colony and whose wife and child died. So she married him, and then they moved to England. For the period they were living in the USA, in North America, this was before the USA then, she had a child, a son, and on the way to England, she got sick. So one of the versions, it was pneumonia, but it could have been something else, who knows. So she did not survive our climate, or British climate. She died in England, and she's one of the, I don't know, the only one, or maybe one of the very few American Indians buried outside of North America. Sequoia, it's not only a tree. It's also the name of a well-known American Indian, a Cherokee, who created Cherokee alphabet. It was a celebrity. And as I said before, the majority, well, not the majority, all North American Indian tribes did not have an alphabet before. They did not have written language. So he created the first one, and very soon this was accepted by the tribe, and this was a good example for other tribes to continue. And the famous Sitting Bull, I'm sure you have seen this image. Just look at those eyes, which are penetrating, really strong, and he was believed to be a really, not just very strong, but also not just a very strong personality, but also a very brave man. And he was one of the leaders of the Sioux, also a medicine man, who participated in the Battle of Little Bighorn, where General Custer was killed. General Custer was like a favorite of the American government, because he was not just usually very successful in his fightings, but also very handsome. So Sitting Bull had a vision that they would win, and they did win. One of the few cases when this happened. So thank you very much for your attention, and as you can understand, of course, I was trying to put a lot of information together because this topic is enormous, and you can ask some more questions, but I'm sure we cannot cover even just a small part of everything connected with American Indians.
I'd just like to say thank you very much, Oksana. I've learned so much. I feel slightly ashamed being one of the Brits, descendants of which but huge thank you. It's really interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we have some time for some questions, not very many, but
yes, maybe at least just 2, 3 if there are some.
Yes. So
Okay.
just first one remark. I think many lecturers could take some lessons for your way of presenting in your organization in presentation.
Thank you.
Very clear, and like 1 hour and a half were like eye open and ear open.
Everybody except John.
It's a Friday evening. It's possible. It's understandable. Yes, obviously we didn't read we didn't get the information about what's going on now about the future of Indian. Especially, we know that there are some Indian powwows when they try to preserve culture. But how about American government? Do they really are they really engaged in preserving Indians, or is that like the same history going on?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Well, preserving, I associate it with more like animals. So it's not about preserving, it's about apologizing. As I said, a lot of apologies were made. A lot of what could be repaired, possible reparations were also made. The government tries to support them financially, tries to support them socially. Probably you have heard, sometimes we have also this news about some tribes wanting independence and like Brexit, Grexit and other exits. They want to get out of the USA and be independent tribes, independent entities, independent states. Well, I don't really know if it's going to happen, but still the thoughts are something like that. But yes, the government supports them. Not so much money, of course, is given from the federal budget to American Indian affairs, but still there are some programs. There is a wonderful American Indian Museum in Washington, which opened in 2005, right? So you can, if you go also in New York, there are different exhibitions dedicated to them. So not just American Indians themselves, but also the government try to do what can be done, at least. Just one small example, NAGPRA, Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, which was taken in 1990, made all museums and private collectors which had different either remains of the bodies of American Indians or different objects, especially sacred ones, to be returned to the tribes where they belonged. There was a long discussion about that, a lot of stories about that, but finally it works. So most of the time it works. Still, this is they are very much still underpaid. They're still many of them have those health problems, drug abuse, alcohol abuse problems, and so on. But not all, of course. We have some prosperous ones, the ones making good business, the ones working also in the United Nations organizations and getting great educations, PhDs, and becoming important scientists. So the situation luckily changes. So, some more? Mm-hmm.
Sounds good. Thank you for this wonderful lecture. And you see, it was a perfect lecture by a non-native speaker. Yeah. So
thank you.
Keep it in mind because really. Thanks much, and probably a personal question, if I may. How and when have you got interested into this wonderful topic?
Oh, that's a difficult question. I have always been interested in cultures and religions and mythologies and everything connected with this since my childhood, but I think this happened in my last year of the university when I had to choose the topic for my graduation project, and I just was deciding between different ones, could not decide, and one night I went to bed and I realized, okay, in my dream I will have it. So I woke up, I knew exactly what I was going to do, and the more I worked with...
Dreamcatcher.
I didn't have it then, so this was like I always call it just a revelation, but the more I worked with this topic, the more I realized this is mine, part of my heart. I really love it. I really like the worldview of American Indians, the approach to life, the approach to people, a lot of their traditions, beautiful mythology, many wonderful things. So I'm really fascinated by them. So I really love this topic. Mm-hmm.
Then the religion be considered as one religion of all American Indians, or it's completely different?
No, of course. When we say American Indian culture or American Indian religion, as I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, this is just for simplification reasons, of course. So each tribe has, there are some similarities, of course. We have some parallel motives, we have some similar traditions. But, for example, if we take maybe one of the most famous sun dance, which many tribes have and which you could see in some of the Hollywood movies, different tribes had it completely differently. So even similar traditions, yes, some spirits, right? So even some of the similar traditions are still different. So, of course, if you want to study in general, you will study some very general things. Or you should go deeper. Yeah. And maybe one more last question, right? Yeah, we don't have much time.
Which connection between gold fever and extermination of buffalo?
Between, sorry?
Between gold rush.
Ah, yes.
The Gold Rush and
Yeah,
the
yeah.
extermination of bulls.
The extermination of buffalo. Buffaloes. What was the cause of extermination of buffaloes?
Well, I put it on one slide, not to make really big separate stories about it, but because those were two things which really affected American Indian life. And after that, it changed dramatically, but they were not so much connected. The only connection was that, of course, the more gold was found, the more people, the more white people came to the continent, and they wanted to go to those American Indian lands as well. So this was land loss and removal on the one hand, and the extermination of the buffalo was a complete change of the traditional way of life and food source and source of also other ceremonial things. And as I said, it was used for many different purposes, but this is also a sacred animal. They have many sacred animals as well. So both those parts of history made a great impact on American Indians. And I believe, again, of course, this is not all history, as you can imagine. These are just very, very, very few moments. But I believe that those moments really had to be mentioned because these are among the most important ones, the ones which affected their future destiny and life.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's really good.